We must understand that sadness is an ocean, and sometimes we drown, while on other days we are forced to swim. Sadness is not a passing shower that simply dries up on its own. In truth, it is a deep, boundless ocean, shoreless, and sometimes with no escape visible ahead. There are days when we simply stand at the water's edge, letting gentle waves brush against our feet, those quiet moments steady enough for us to truly contemplate our own emotions. But there are other days when we are swept far out, sinking beneath the cold layers where light can scarcely reach. At those times, we no longer feel sadness, we become one with it. It is an inner ecosystem where every emotion carries its own reason for existing. Sadness is not the enemy. It is a signal, the silent language of wounds that have yet to be named. Drowning in sadness is not a sign of weakness, but the moment the mind forces us to face what we have avoided for far too long. Yet if we remain there, we will be pulled under. Life does not ask us to stay away from this ocean. It asks us to learn how to swim within it. Swimming does not mean controlling every wave, but understanding the rhythm of the water. Sometimes we must let go so the body can rise naturally. Other times we must kick hard to keep from sinking deeper. That is the delicate art of balancing acceptance and action. A psychologically mature person is not someone who never feels sad, but someone who knows when to drift with the current and when to fight to survive. Through each drowning, we quietly forge a hidden strength, the refined ability to endure, the silent faith that no matter how deep the ocean, we can still find our way back to the surface. Because in the end, sadness does not exist to drown us forever, but to teach us to breathe more deeply, to live more slowly, and to understand ourselves in the most authentic way. It's sad when a friend you know becomes a friend you used to know. Henry Rollins. When someone who once felt so familiar in our lives suddenly becomes nothing more than a quiet name resting in memory, there is no clear moment that marks the end, only conversations that grow fewer, silences that stretch longer, until both stand on opposite shores of life without ever noticing the exact instant they drifted apart. It is a loss without any farewell ritual, a vague sadness. We cannot mourn it the way we mourn something tangible, yet deep inside the absence aches with painful clarity. That person has not vanished completely. They still exist somewhere in this world, only they no longer belong to ours. What truly hurts is not just the distance, but the gulf between used to be and now. Once so close that words were unnecessary, now so distant that we don't even know where to begin. But perhaps every relationship has its own life cycle, just like the seasons. Some people come to walk beside us for one stretch of the road, sharing a version of ourselves that existed only in that moment. When we change, they change too, and the shared path quietly forks. This does not make what we shared any less meaningful. On the contrary, it makes the memories even more precious, because we know they can never be repeated. Not everyone who enters our life is meant to stay forever. And sometimes the deepest form of love is not holding on, but gently allowing each other to become used to be in peace. Because even if they are no longer here, a part of us shaped by the time we spent together will remain forever. To understand all is to forgive all. Buddha. When we truly understand a person, the cracks in their past, their hidden fears, the defenses they built just to survive, we realize that most of the pain they caused did not come from pure malice, but from wounds that had never been healed. At that moment, the anger inside us loses its edge, because we see behind their actions a fragile structure desperately trying to protect itself. Peeling back each layer of disguise until we reach the human core, like standing in a pitch-dark room and slowly turning on every light switch, each beam revealing another piece of the truth. And when the room is finally bright, we no longer fear the shadows that once terrified us. Forgiveness, then, is no longer a forced moral duty. It becomes the natural result of deep understanding. We do not forgive because they deserve it, but because we are no longer trapped by our own lack of understanding. Yet forgiveness does not mean accepting every behavior or staying in relationships that wound us. It is an act of inner liberation, returning the burden to where it truly belongs. We can understand someone and still choose to walk away. We can feel compassion without going back. That is the fine line between compassion and self-respect. Understanding does not make the world perfect, but it makes our minds lighter. When we stop seeing life through the lens of judgment and begin to see it with profound awareness, we cease fighting the past. And in that stillness, forgiveness is no longer something we must force. It flows as naturally as breath, like water moving onward, without clinging, without resentment, simply continuing on its way. Amidst all the change and chaos, keep the stillness within you. Deepak Chopra. When the outside world grows loud, our minds are easily carried away, anxiety born from anticipation, fear born from imagination. And it is precisely in those moments that stillness becomes a conscious act. We choose not to let the waves outside dictate the rhythm inside. Inner stillness is like the ocean floor. While storms rage on the surface, far below lies a realm of near-perfect silence. A psychologically mature person is not someone who controls every event, but someone who preserves the depth of their own being. They feel everything, yet are not swept away. They observe emotions, yet do not become them. It is that subtle ability to separate experience from self, a form of freedom few ever fully reach. The harder we try to control the world, the more we lose control of ourselves. But when we turn inward, adjusting our breath, our attention, the way we interpret events, we create a healthy distance between stimulus and response. In that space, we stop reacting on instinct and begin choosing how we exist. Keeping stillness does not mean becoming numb. It means ensuring our emotions never become the ones in control. It is a quiet power, unassuming, never loud, yet strong enough not to be bent by circumstance. And when you hold that stillness, you will realize something vital. The world may be chaotic, but you do not have to be. Because the truest peace is not found in the circumstances, but in how firmly you stand within them. Before you criticize someone, you should try putting yourself in their place. That way, when you criticize them, you are already a mile away from them and you are wearing their shoes. People often rush to judge from the safety of their own position, where every decision looks clear and reasonable. But when we truly wear their shoes, stepping into their circumstances, their limits, their fears, and their shortcomings, we begin to see that behavior never exists in isolation. It is the result of a complex chain of causes we rarely see from the outside. Judgment then loses its simplicity. It is softened by understanding. Already a mile away and wearing their shoes, on one hand we gain distance so we are not swallowed by negativity, on the other we stay close enough to truly feel what they feel. This is the rare balance between reason and compassion. We no longer criticize from a higher place, but from a space of deeper understanding. And the beautiful thing is, once we truly understand, the need to criticize quietly fades away. Stepping into another's shoes does not only make us gentler with them, it also forces us to face ourselves. Because in that process, we realize that, given the same conditions and limitations, we might have acted exactly as they did. This awareness shatters the illusion of our own superiority, the very illusion that feeds judgment. When we learn to step into someone else's shoes, we do more than soften our words. We expand the space for empathy in our own minds. And in that space, people stop being objects to evaluate and become stories to understand. If you don't know where you want to go, then it doesn't matter which path you take. Cheshire, Alice. Freedom to choose is not the same as meaning. When we do not know where we want to go, every road begins to look the same, not because the roads are identical, but because the mind has no reference point to tell them apart. Choice then stops being purposeful and becomes mere drifting disguised as decision. We can travel far and fast, yet deep down we still feel motionless, because movement without direction creates no real progress, only the illusion of it. Lacking a goal is not the lack of options, it is the lack of connection to ourselves. When we no longer know what truly matters, every path loses its meaning. We easily drift toward external standards, other people's success, society's expectations, borrowed goals, and then fool ourselves into thinking we are on the right track. But direction is never decided from the outside. It is born from inner clarity. Like a ship leaving port with no charted course. The vast ocean offers endless possibilities, yet that very vastness makes it easy to lose our way. The wind may be strong, the waves may be high, but the real problem is not the conditions outside, it is that the ship does not know which harbor it seeks. Without a destination, every effort becomes vague and every choice loses its weight. We do not need to know the exact final port from the beginning, we only need a clear enough direction to guide the next step. Clarity does not come from endless thinking, it comes from experiencing, testing, and constantly adjusting. When we gradually discover who we are and what makes our life meaningful, the path stops being random, it becomes a reflection of who we truly are. When you know where you want to go, even the hardest road feels worth taking. But when you do not know, even the easiest road is just an endless loop. Sometimes the right path is not the easiest one. Willow, Pocahontas. What is right does not always feel easy. In fact, the opposite is often true. The right paths usually demand that we face discomfort, fear, and the unfinished parts of ourselves. The easy path is the path of habit, of procrastination, of avoiding inner conflict. It feels smooth like still water, yet that very smoothness quietly carries us farther from the better version of ourselves without us noticing. The right path is often rough not because it is wrong, but because it forces us to grow. It places us in situations where we can no longer remain the person we were, where we must learn responsibility, let go of the familiar, and sometimes accept loss. Psychologically, this is the zone of resistance, where the brain wants to turn back, because it costs energy and shatters the sense of safety. Yet it is exactly there that real growth begins. The path that circles the foot of the mountain is always easier flat, low risk. But if we keep walking it, we will never see the summit. Meanwhile, the steep trail full of rocks and sweat brings us closer with every step to a vast view we could never have from below. Difficulty, in this case, is not a sign of error. It is proof of depth. The right path does not always feel comfortable right away. It may make us doubt, tire, even feel lonely. But over time, it creates a profound kind of peace, a deep satisfaction that comes from knowing we are living true to our own values instead of chasing fleeting comfort. When we stop asking what is easiest and start asking what is true to the person I want to become. And when you are brave enough to choose the path that is not easy, you will discover that those very difficult steps are quietly building a stronger version of you. The only thing predictable about life is its unpredictability. Remy, Ratatouille. Humans crave control, yet the very nature of life is uncontrollable. We make plans, draw maps, and convince ourselves that if we calculate carefully enough, everything will unfold exactly as expected. But then life suddenly bends the straight line, a twist, a change, something nameless that reminds us stability is only a comforting illusion the mind creates. The need to predict is a survival mechanism. The brain wants to know what will happen so it can reduce risk. Yet that very need becomes the root of anxiety, because when reality refuses to match our expectations, we feel we have lost control. And here lies the paradox. The harder we try to predict everything, the more vulnerable we become to life's surprises. Conversely, when we accept that unpredictability is the rule, we shift from control to adaptation. Like a river that winds without an exact map or fixed course, we can learn to steer, but we cannot command the water. The sudden bends, the rapids, even the calm stretches, all of them belong to the journey. And when we stop fighting the current, we begin to understand that this very unpredictability gives life its depth. We build an inner self flexible enough to move with it. When we no longer demand that life be certain, we open ourselves to welcome the unexpected, not with fear, but with curiosity. Because sometimes the very things we could not predict lead us to places we never knew we needed to reach. When you accept that the only certainty is uncertainty, you stop living in fear of the future. You begin to live more fully in the present, the only place you can ever truly touch. You are not allowed to let anyone define your limits just because of where you come from. The only limit you have is your own mind. Gusteau, Ratatouille. There is an invisible chain many people carry their whole lives. the definitions imposed from outside, where you come from, what class you belong to, who you can and cannot become. Those limits begin as mere words, but if repeated long enough, they seep into the mind and become part of the identity we unconsciously accept. And the most dangerous thing is not that others underestimate us, but that we begin to see ourselves through that same limited lens. Origin is only a starting point, never a sentence. People are not bound by circumstances, but by the way they interpret those circumstances. Two people can begin from the same place. One sees only barriers, the other sees fuel. The difference is not in the outside world, but in the inner space where beliefs are formed. The only limit you have is your own mind. Is not just encouragement, it is a profound warning. If you allow your mind to shrink because of fear, self-doubt, or old stories about yourself, no one else needs to stop you. You will stop yourself. But if you expand your awareness, believing you can learn, you can change, you can rise, then the external barriers gradually lose their power. Like a bird born inside a cage, if it believes the sky does not exist, its wings become meaningless. But the moment it realizes the cage is only a small part of the world, its instinct to fly awakens. And even if leaving the cage is terrifying, it is still the only way to become who it truly is. Change the way we see ourselves. When you stop letting others define you, you do more than break limits. You redefine what is possible for yourself. And in that wide open space, you will discover that what was once called a limit was only a line drawn by the mind, and you have every right to erase it. What we do for ourselves dies with us. What we do for others and for the world remains forever. Albert Pine. Most of what we accumulate for ourselves, money, fame, even personal victories, has a limited lifespan tied to our own existence. When we leave, they vanish like footprints on sand erased by the waves. But what we give away, an act of kindness, a positive influence, something that changes another life, has the power to ripple outward beyond time, like waves that keep expanding across the water. We are often caught up in the need to affirm ourselves. What have I achieved? What do I have? But this saying turns the question around and points us toward a deeper one. What have I left behind? When we live only for ourselves, life becomes closed. Every meaning revolves around personal satisfaction. But when we begin to live for others, for something larger than ourselves, we step beyond the limits of the ego and touch a more lasting kind of meaning. One candle only warms itself and slowly dies when the wax runs out. Another candle uses its own flame to light other candles. The second flame does not disappear. It multiplies, spreads, and continues through new sources of light. What we give away is the same. It does not vanish. It is stored in memories, in actions, and in the way others keep passing that value forward. This does not mean we must completely sacrifice ourselves, but that the deepest meaning of life lies not in how much we keep, but in whom we have touched and what we have changed. When we help one person, inspire one person, or simply make the world around us a little better, we create a mark that does not depend on our physical presence. What remains after everything is not what we owned, but what we gave away. And in a very subtle way, that is how human beings transcend the limits of their finite lives, not by living forever, but by leaving a part of themselves in the world, continuing to live through everything they have given.